It truly was a season like no other for the Phoenix Mercury in 2022. And as a former Phoenix Mercury beat writer, I can't wait to talk to the current Phoenix Mercury beat writer at the Next, Hayden Cilley, about everything that went down for the orange and purple team down in the Valley. It's the Locked On Women's Basketball Podcast. Let's go.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, hello, and happy Friday, everybody. We hope you are excited. It is now September. We are getting ready for the weekend, though. To take you behind the scenes here, we are pre-recording this. It's still August, where Hayden and I are talking today here. But I'm Alex Simon from Bay Area News Group, kind of just a casual hanger-on around the Next, having previously been here plenty of times. We've got Hayden Cilley calling in from my old stomping grounds, the Valley of the Sun. Hayden, how warm is it in Phoenix right now?
Last time I checked, Alex, it is 110 degrees. It's too hot. I mean, you've lived here long enough. Have you ever tried the thing where you take a pan, you put it on the concrete, you try and fry an egg on it?
The thing that I did was baking cookies on the front of the car, the dashboard cookies.
I'm gonna have to try that.
I don't know if that was a user error more so than like the heat error, but they did not turn out great. But I think that was more because I didn't make a good cookie. But that's what you get when you come to Phoenix sometimes, is that it can be so unbelievably hot no matter what, and especially in the summertime, right in the heart of the WNBA season. But frankly, I mean, this season, just in terms of drama, there was no more hotter drama, I think, on television this year than the Phoenix Mercury were once the season got going, because Hayden, you got quite the year to break into the beat. I feel like it would be a little bit of a therapy session to let you just kind of talk through everything that happened this year, right?
Yeah, I mean, where would I even start? There's so much stuff that happened. And like you said, I mean, this was my first time covering any real like professional sports team throughout an entire season. And from start to finish, obviously you start with Brittney Griner being wrongfully detained in Russia in February, and that was sort of just a spiral of things to come for this team. Some of it, was, I don't know how I would say it. Some of it was, situational. Some of it was self-inflicted. But you know what? I mean, they still made the playoffs. And, I know the whole argument that, oh, there's only 12 teams in the WNBA. But still, I mean, I think given everything that's happening, I'd still say
it is an accomplishment, even if the threshold to get that accomplishment is easier to achieve than in other leagues, no doubt. But especially given the team that was having to win 2 out of their last 4 home games to make it there, a team that legitimately at one point was hoping to have a starting lineup this season with 5 Olympians in it, from Diana Taurasi, Skylar Diggins-Smith, Kia Nurse, Griner, who obviously is a circumstance that nobody could have saw coming. Nobody would ever wish upon anyone anywhere in that regard, and especially to a team. Then you throw Tina Charleston, who was currently still in the playoffs in Seattle right now. And none of those 5 were available for what turned out to be the last 6 games of the season for Phoenix, between the 4 final home games that they had and the 2 playoff games. And, I look at the way the season has gone. I think self-inflicted is something you could apply even more broader at times. But I do think once you get to the season and once you have your group together, just the litany of things that happened, Hayden, are still just a sight to behold, especially if you put it all in the running log that way.
Yeah, I think the first thing you start off with, obviously, is the whereabouts of Skylar Diggins-Smith. Someone who, in a lot of people's opinions, should be on the all WNBA first team, right? This is someone who, averaged, I think it was over 20 points a game, if I'm not mistaken. She was, I know she was top 5 in scoring. She won this team games multiple times, multiple performances against the Sparks, 29 points in two of the games against the Sparks. And, against Minnesota in that double overtime, she had And, in 11, she is such a great player. She is. She will win you games. But, I kind of shrug a little bit because I just really would have wanted to see her in the playoffs. Obviously people were going to write out Phoenix no matter what. They're playing Vegas. And after that second game, when Vegas hit 23 3-pointers, like, obviously you get it. But, she made the all WNBA, or might make the all WNBA first team. She'll be on one of those teams for sure, at least in my opinion. But I wish it wasn't so abrupt the way that she left. I know it was for personal reasons, and I use that term a little bit loosely because, it might be actually for personal reasons. It might be something outside of that, but I was just a little bit bummed just being able, like, from a reporting sense, not being able to cover her in the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, she averaged 19.7 points a game, third in the WNBA this season. She added on top of that four rebounds a game, 5.5 assists, a steal and a half per game, which I believe was in the top 10 in the league. Just an overall, just wonderful season for Skylar. And especially there were many games it felt like where she was the only player who was trying to carry this team to the heights that it had talent wise, especially early in the season when things weren't working. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of kind of mystery, and it became a very curious thing in hindsight to hear the initial ruling for why Skylar was out for what was the first of that final 4 games down the stretch was a non-COVID illness that then became, well, this is a personal reason that she's away from the team, and the team ultimately gives a partial suspension to her, especially because earlier in the season, when there was a very public kind of spat between Skylar and Diana Taurasi in Las Vegas, Skylar then missed 2 games with a non-COVID illness. It's certainly a lot of mystery. Skylar, exit interviews are voluntary, and Skylar chose not to come to do an exit interview with the media to kind of talk about anything. I wonder when we would hear from Skylar next at all. And that kind of adds to the mystery for her in particular as to kind of what's gone wrong. Our fearless leader at the Next, Howard Megdal, was reporting around the trade deadline that Phoenix had been shopping Skylar after she sent out a tweet with a clown emoji of her head coach advocating for Diana Taurasi. And once again, it's kind of tough to see those things as not conjoined. It does make it very interesting, Hayden. General Manager Jim Pittman did address a question directly asked about Skylar and whatnot, and basically said, she's got a contract, she's on the roster, so we expect her to be here. Is that an expectation that you also carry?
No. And you brought this up before the show, when he said the same thing about Bria Hartley last season and said, she is almost untouchable. And, she's one of the core pieces of this team. And, I understand at the time that the ability to acquire Diamond DeShields, an electric player on both sides of the floor. But, something sort of ticks me off a little bit when someone says something like that about a specific player and then they deal that player. Because it's like, if, sometimes the best thing to say is nothing at all. And I think in this case, I think they're going to try and trade Sky. But we saw the same incident when she was in Dallas. She wanted to force her way out of there, and she did. And I'm just curious to what team would be willing to take her on, because talent-wise, she's phenomenal. She can do just about everything on a basketball court. But and I don't mean this to sound callous, but I don't know who wants to deal with the baggage and with some of, the unnecessary drama, if you will. When she was voted an all-star, I believe she was, I think it was 14th amongst player votes, because like it's kind of gone around the league that players really don't like to play with her. And I mean, if you're Jim Pittman, I understand wanting to trade her. It would just be, who can you get? Because we know that Diggins-Smith and head coach Vanessa Nygaard, they butt heads, and they have done so publicly, and they've done so in press conferences, and they've just made these very subtle remarks about each other. And I think, given how the season went, and even though Skylar basically jumped ship The team still made the playoffs. I think Pittman's going to side with Nygaard. Do I agree with it? Yes and no, but I would just be curious to see who they would trade Skylar for.
And I do actually have some more things to add to that. But before we do that, I just want to ask, are you somebody who thinks it's okay to drive stoned? What's the worst that can happen? You end up driving below the speed limit? It's no big deal, right? Well, that's wrong. The truth is that your reaction times slow way down when you're high. You not only put yourself in danger, but everyone around you. Talk about a buzzkill. Stop kidding yourself. It's not okay to drive high, period. If you've been using marijuana in any form, do not get behind the wheel. If you feel different, you drive different. Drive high, get a DUI. So Hayden, obviously, this season has gone the way that it's been. This is your first season on the beat. You've kind of come in with a wholesale change in Phoenix. They have had a brand new head coach right as you've come into the beat. There's been other changes around the organization in that regard too. I do find it interesting as somebody who was around that team last year and kind of saw how things changed. I was around when they did do the introductory press conference for Nygaard, and that had happened 7 weeks after they had made the announcement that they were parting ways with Sandy Brondello. But they never kind of did any presser or anything to state why they decided to move on from Brondello at the time. And they came back in the presser with Nygaard, the hire of Vanessa Nygaard. That was the first time that they talked to anybody publicly. And so I asked about that, and Pittman said, and I would actually take the quote from that story at the time, said, we just thought it was time for a new voice for our team. It's a long time. 8 years is a long time to be with one group of people. We certainly wish Sandy well with her new job. I'm confident she'll do very well in New York. And I kind of wrote this at the time when they did the hire. To kind of say 8 years has been a long time was a very curious thing because of the fact that really nobody on that Phoenix team had been there for all 8 years. There was only 2 players who had even been with Sandy from the time she got hired till then, which was Diana Taurasi and Brittney Griner. And it was very obvious during last season, and I talked to Skylar about this multiple times, how much she had grown in appreciation and grown very close with Sandy Brondello. And so there's a part of me that wonders if that dynamic between Nygaard and Diggins-Smith never had a chance to get off on a right foot because of the fact that, Nygaard was a coach that was replacing somebody that Skylar was close to. It seems like for me, there was never a chance for it to even succeed because it was set up to fail. And that sets up the head coach to fail as well as the team to fail in that way.
Yeah. I mean, you hit the nail on the head right there. And it's very interesting as well because during their media day, I talked to Skylar about her relationship with Nygaard and just sort of how it's been. And I chuckle now because of just the sheer irony of it, with what we've been talking about. And, like she basically said, it's fresh. Other, she was very pleased that she brought on. And I know one in particular was Crystal Robinson, because Crystal was in Dallas with Skylar and, helped her, when she had her son and everything like that. And it sounded like, obviously she missed Sandy, but, she was ready to do the season with Nygaard. But, like you said, I don't think it ever really got a chance to fully develop because it felt like every single week, something was changing.
And I guess when you look at it, and especially in hindsight with the season, there's definitely some missteps that I think that happened in both regards. And some of it not even necessarily directly to each person's fault. When Nygaard said the full quote that ended up becoming the video that caught the clown emoji quote tweet from Skylar, the full quote was starting with Vanessa saying, I love that Skylar made the All-Star game. She's totally deserving of it. But then she transitioned into the point about Diana and maybe said something that in hindsight, she probably said a little too, with a little too much punch. It's not an All-Star game with Diana Taurasi. But then the social media team, you pick out your quotes, you want to send a message. And I don't blame anybody for doing this because you have a job to do and you want to have your coach send a message. But, when you clip that to kind of only have the, it's not an All-Star game with Diana Taurasi, that does probably leave a sting to your actual All-Star. So I do wonder in the long run, what kind of Nygaard's coaching level is. I know over at the Next and actually over at the 9, Howard Megdal, who has both of those entities under here, kind of pointed out that is kind of one of the biggest coaching gaffes he's seen, and certainly one that shocked everyone in the WNBA. I get the sense that you would believe Nygaard's going to be back for next season at this point. Do you not?
Oh, I think it's a lock that she's back. And because she didn't say it she really didn't emphasize it too much during the beginning of the season, but towards the tail end, she talked about her system was built around BG, around Brittney Griner. And when you have one of the most dominant centers in the game, if not ever, and I think the thing that really stands out to me about BG is just how skilled that she is. She's not just 6'9" and she's like lumbering around in the paint. Like she has a very crafty skill set. Post up, she's developing a 3-point shot, just a really soft touch around the basket, great defensive awareness. Obviously made Brianna Turner's life really, really easy when it comes to, cuts and, playing off of one another and things like that. So I think given all the changes that Nygaard had to make, and, you bring in someone like a Tina Charles, who they signed in February, just before BG was wrongfully detained. It was so weird because there was an interesting tidbit I pulled from one of my stories. It was from Synergy Stats, and Tina Charles, I believe, counted for just over 60% of the team's total post-up possessions. You get this? She left in June.
At the halfway point.
Yeah, she left at the halfway point.
And she still accounted for more than half of the post-ups for the full season.
Yeah, and obviously, I think there was more animosity between Charles and the team than she wants to talk about, or that the media might want to dig into. But her system was designed around BG, and when you don't have one of the best players, frankly, in all of basketball, it makes it tough. So yeah, make a long story short, yes, I think she'll be back.
And I guess, there's a lot of things that would make you wonder if the system was designed around BG, how was Tina ever going to fit? It's not as if, BG doesn't also play in the post as well. So if the system was set there, you would still be having two players who like to be in the post, even if they can hit 3-pointers. That was certainly something that when Tina signed and when Tina came and did a presser, those were some of the things I was still asking about when was transitioning from me to you in that regard, is how is this going to work? How are you going to do this? I remember actually specifically Nygaard talked about the fact that she was watching the Rio 2016 Olympics when the starting lineup included Diana Taurasi, Tina Charles, Brittney Griner, and kind of seeing how those two interplayed with each other and how they work together. So certainly, there's no way to account for the volume in which you miss with Griner not there. I don't think it's fair to speculate, by the way, one way or the other as to what's going to happen with Griner. But I think at this point, you almost have to start to assume you won't have her until you do a little bit. You at least, Jim Pittman's always been the type that says he's prepared for just about any scenario that he could possibly face. But, I don't know if it's fair to even assume and jump back to the idea that, oh, well, BG will be back next year. I mean, no one knows. This stuff is so out of any possible control that it's hard to even factor how that's going to play for next season.
Yeah, I am very impressed though. And I know I talked about this quite a bit already, but just the amount of adjustments that Nygaard has made, and specifically with Sophie Cunningham, putting her at the power, a position that she has never been her entire basketball career, dating all the way back from Mizzou. And she flourished. She was top 10 in scoring post All-Star break. She was second in threes made, and 3-point percentage, in around 40%. And she took on a whole new role. And, like we talk about, I just find it so perplexing how when your offense was designed to, I don't know if I would say to mainly be in the post, when you develop a 5-out offense and it starts working, and Sophie Cunningham has been a matchup nightmare for a lot of these teams. I look at teams like the Sparks, for example, back when they had Liz Cambage, and they would swing it out to Cunningham and it would just be, lights out. But yeah, I don't know. I think I'm excited to see what Nygaard's actual system will look like, because for this past season, it really hasn't even been the one that she desired.
As we kind of look toward next season, there are technically 3 players who have a guaranteed contract for next season, though one of them is Skylar Diggins-Smith, who the GM says is going to be on, has a contract for next season, so he expects her, but I'm not sure if that's a fair expectation for everybody to carry into the offseason. But we know that Brianna Turner will be back. She signed a 2-year extension that I think is one of the better contracts in the WNBA period at that price point. Diamond DeShields has 1 more season, but this is a blank canvas. Otherwise, there's several WNBA teams that have kind of very few players that have a guaranteed contract for next season. But Phoenix maybe has the blankest canvas of anybody, even with all the players that they brought in to kind of keep trying to make things work. They could retain some players' rights. There's certainly a chance that happens, but it all kind of comes back to where Diana Taurasi is at. Now that she's turned 40 and just completed the season, it was actually one of the healthiest seasons she's had in a long time, up until she had her quad issue in the 5th to the last game of the regular season, or excuse me, the 6th of the last game. And then she wasn't able to play the rest of the way. And it made me wonder if Diana was really going to push it and try to make it into these playoff games, even though, it was a grade 2 strain that usually is like a 4 to 8 week thing. If she somehow was back in the 2nd week, was that a sign that maybe she knew this was going to be it? I kind of at least think there's got to be a lot of sentiment that they aren't going to not have Diana Taurasi, to use the double negative there.
Yeah. It's very interesting you bring up those contracts. And like you said, Brianna Turner signed that 2-year extension. They signed Kia Nurse to a contract extension as well. Phoenix is in a very interesting spot. If BG Russia, I think this would be a totally different ball game. I think that as management, as the coach, you would just look to win now, because it'd be your golden opportunity. But like you said, we don't know the certainty of Diana Taurasi coming back. She's stated, how she feels good and how she wants to come back. But, we've seen a lot of people, retire suddenly. I mean, look at Sue Bird. She said in the middle of the season that, she's like, I think that I'm going to call it after this. And Phoenix right now, I think you have to prepare for. Cunningham is 25. Breezy, I believe, is 24. And, Diamond DeShields is about 27. So, you have a pretty solid core. And then Kia Nurse as well. And I think also another interesting part that I feel a lot of people are forgetting is Phoenix does not have their draft pick this year, because it's going to Chicago. Thank you, James Wade, for screwing over the Phoenix Mercury and trying to help Mill. But hey,
I will say this: it wasn't like he did that without any. It's not like he just did that because he could. I mean, that's what got Phoenix Diamond DeShields. So. Yeah. It takes 2 to make a trade. In that case, it took 3. But Phoenix didn't give that away because they had to. No, they wanted to. They willingly gave it away. And that's part of, I guess, this team has been going so hard and attempting to go all out for titles. And that still seems to be the plan. But it seems like it would be harder than ever to do that. And that's part of why, in part, you made the move for Skylar when you traded for her all of now 3 seasons ago, as she finishes her 3rd season in Phoenix. You made the trade for her to help kind of bridge the gap and be the superstar that forms when Diana does end up. And so for, Skylar's only in her early 30s. She probably has several years left. I don't know if I would say 10, the way that it would to get to Diana's age, but Skylar was going to be the one that, if all went well, Diana would fade off into the sunset and it would become Skylar's team. And Skylar and BG, a little more similar age range, very good pairing skill set wise. They really carried the team through some times without Diana last season to at least stay in the playoff chase, to make that big run into the finals. That would have been the duo that you built around. And now you've kind of entered this kind of no man's land where if Diana comes back, I would, Jim Pittman has basically said Diana will be a Phoenix Mercury player as long as she wants to. We'll make it work. And so I would suspect that that's going to happen. But then what else changes around her becomes a huge blank canvas, but it's kind of, you don't have the assets really to trade to get better. You've also traded your second round pick for this upcoming season to the Indiana Fever, by the way, if as the Phoenix Mercury, they only have 2 third round picks, but they've found some success in kind of finding usable WNBA players from the waiver wire, from undrafted rounds. How does this team, what does this team need to do in your mind, Hayden, to maybe find the people to fit Nygaard's system, even with the 2 biggest pieces of it being massive question marks in Taurasi and Griner?
What I think is very crazy, Alex, is that I think that they've actually got a couple of those pieces already. They signed Kayla Davis, and I didn't think that would be as big of a move as it was. Granted, I know game 2, you lose by 37. She still scored 20 plus. She had a career game. And I watched that game, with everyone at the Next on playback. Shout out to that. Just want to give a little shameless plug to that real quick. But she got to her spots. Post ups, pull up jumpers, coming off of screens, and it was just very creative the way that Nygaard used her. She used her in about every single way that you could. And for someone of her size, for someone that's over 6 feet tall, handling the ball, taking it up the floor, I think it's very interesting. I think she has a very unique skill set. She's one of those players will give you everything that she's got. And I think that for the Phoenix Mercury, I think that's got to be their identity, at least without BG. You may not be the most talented team. You may not have the best players, but they're going to play with heart. And I know that they did that during the second half of the season, especially with Sophie Cunningham and Brianna Turner and, even Jenny Sims, getting a couple of those starts and, putting up really good production. So I think just maybe scout out a couple more players. I say just keep it all in-house. The last thing you need if you're the Phoenix Mercury is more change.
Right. Though that being said, a couple of those players you mentioned were signed on hardship agreements, which automatically means that Phoenix doesn't get to keep their rights. They're free agents. In theory, they have to wait to even negotiate with them until February. So it's not. So that's kind of the precarious position. The players who they do have under contract for next season are very limited. And one of them in particular seems like somebody that they might be happier to not have in Skylar Diggins-Smith. They have a couple of major question marks, obviously one that is completely out of their control in Brittney Griner, but even Diana Taurasi, does she play again? If she does, you assume she comes back at what point? Kia Nurse didn't play at all this season, rehabbing from a torn ACL, but she did take what was effectively kind of the qualifying offer. And it at least kind of makes you wonder if there was maybe a little bit of a handshake agreement to kind of give Kia the contract she deserved last offseason before she got hurt, if she was willing to help the team by taking a lesser contract for 2022. But Kia is an unrestricted free agent. So if she doesn't decide she wants to stick around with Phoenix, Phoenix has no way to control her rights. There's a few players who they do have control over as restricted free agent, including Sophie Cunningham, who might get a pretty significant payday from somebody else if they want to make life difficult on Phoenix. But I would agree that that's somebody Phoenix has to do whatever they can to retain. But she's earned not just one pay bump, because when they did not pick up her rookie year, fourth rookie year option, she got a little bit of a $3,000 raise, but she's probably going to get closer to 100,000, maybe more than 100,000 this season. And then on top of that, you have Shae Petty. And I kind of want to end just kind of talking about one of the best stories in the WNBA that we've seen over the last 4 years in Shae Petty, who had a career overseas for super long, was brought in a few different times by the Washington Mystics, even stuck around when she wasn't kept by the Mystics and won a title in 2019 as an assistant coach, but really found a home as a key WNBA everyday player for the Phoenix Mercury, and even was starting as they won a couple of games down the stretch. And in game 1, it just, in the worst luck possible and kind of as the finishing point for this team, for Shae Petty to go down with a ruptured Achilles. I hope for her sake that there is a path for her to still come back to the WNBA and still be a professional player. But it really was an unfortunate way for one of the most trying seasons I think you can envision for a team to end, was with more things to have to battle through, and for a player to be handed one of the worst injuries you possibly can on the basketball court.
Yeah. And I mean, Sophie Cunningham said after that game, after game one, she said it's basically like the dagger in the heart for this season. You know, everything that could have gone wrong went wrong, and you know it especially pains me to see a player like Shae Petty go down with that type of injury because, like you said, her story and you know how she played overseas, how she was an assistant with the Washington Mystics, and then you know get signed by Phoenix in the Wubble, you know makes a huge impact last season, and then this season, you know her scoring averages bumped up. I think she might have been the only player this season to have every single statistical category go up. And you know she is taking on a greater role. You know the last 4 games of the season, you know she averaged around 43% from three on nearly 6 attempts a game, which is which is great considering the sort of the rocky from three. You know she just plays with a tremendous amount of heart. You know defensively, I watched her lock up some of the best stars across the entire league. And one of my favorites was when New York came to town. Sorry, Howard, if you're listening to this. And when she was guarding Sabrina, because Shea is one of those players, you know, she's not going to swipe at everything, but she's just so smart. Call outs on screens, you know, when to switch. And, you know, she's just such a fundamentally sound player. I hope that, you know, like you said, I hope her recovery goes very well. I hope that she's able to make a return to the W because, you know, the league needs players like her. The world needs players like her, and the world needs people like her.
I am certain it's not the last that we will see of Shae Petty in the WNBA, and hopefully it is not the last that we see of her on the court. But we're also hoping, Hayden Cilley, that it is not the last that we see of you here on the Locked On Women's Basketball Podcast. Thank you so much for joining. Where can the people find you and what you're doing and kind of what you're up to during the off season?
They can follow me on Twitter at Hayden Cilley. That's how you pronounce my last name. Quite a few chuckles from that. But yeah, I'm very active on Twitter, especially during the especially during the regular season, but through the off season as well. I've got some really cool things lined up through the next and through our founder Howard Megdal. So I'm really excited for that.
And you can go ahead and follow me at Alex Simon Sports over on Twitter, and I think pretty much anywhere that you can find social media platforms to follow. Thank you all for joining us. We hope you have a lovely weekend and enjoy Game 3 of the WNBA semifinals. Will either of these series go to a Game 4? We'll have to see.